Over the last 15 years, we have seen a couple of fighting games make a huge comeback thanks to a new entry in their series after a long hiatus. Like for example, the new Virtua Fighter new officially game announced you're seeing on the screen, of course. Also, it happened with Killer Instinct and KI 2013 because before that, the last KI was on technically 1996, and also with Samurai Showdown and the reboot of 2019, because before that a specific entry in the series, the last Sam Show was on 2008. So it seems like we are living in this moment in which a slow but moving train around rebooting classic fighting game IPs is actually happening. So in this video, we are going to talk about 10 IPs that deserve a second chance and should maybe get a new entry to make a huge comeback. So let me know in the comments which old IPs you want to see come back the most, and let's get into the list and see if we can get lucky and get a couple of reboots at EVO announced. So let's get into it. And let's actually kick off this list with a couple of Capcom games because they for sure have some IPs that deserve to make a comeback. And we gotta start with Darkstalkers, arguably one of the classic IPs from Capcom that people want to see come back the most. And I think that if you execute it right, making a comeback with Darkstalkers is actually relatively easy. Like, it's similar in my opinion to the Guilty Gear situation. Of course, Guilty Gear never had like a super gigantic hiatus, but before Strive, Guilty Gear was not that big. It was still a very niche fighting game. And with Darkstalkers, I think that if you go the Strive route and basically create the modern version of the IP with amazing graphics, you know, good and engaging fighting game mechanics and interesting gameplay, you can see Darkstalkers back at the top without much trouble. I think that the IP has everything to do it. It has the mechanics, it is interesting enough in terms of gameplay, it has the roster and the characters and the visual design. Darkstalkers to me has everything to be a huge success. So I think that if Capcom is willing to do it, and maybe they are working on this and we don't know about it, we could see a Darkstalkers game reboot basically in the future, and Darkstalkers could make the comeback of the century when it comes to reviving old fighting game IP. So let's hope that we can get a new Darkstalkers sooner than later. And this is where people will love and hate me, because the second Capcom game is not going to be Rival Schools. I know that a ton of people will want to see Rival Schools come back, so we're going to talk about that on a different video. But for this one, I really want to give the spotlight to Cyberbots. I think that Cyberbots is such a good IP and is really one of the most forgotten fighting game IPs, especially from Capcom. And I think that Cyberbots has everything to actually be successful in the modern fighting game era. Like, it has the aesthetic to attract people and basically want to buy the game. Like, if you make this sort of, you know, mecha fighter in a modern engine and make it look like a game, for example, like SF6 or Tekken 8, it would probably be one of the most gorgeous fighting games out there. And people love mechas, man. Like, people love robots fighting. Like, they would not be mad at all if they see a couple of giant robots in a fighting game. So I think that Cyberbots has the potential to be a huge success, but is one of the most slept on, forgotten fighting game IPs. And I would really love to see Cyberbots make a comeback. I think that it could happen, but it is not as likely maybe as Darkstalkers. So that's why I wanted to give this game the spotlight, because I would love to see Cyberbots come back once again to its glory, and maybe we can get a new entry for the mecha fighter. And now we're gonna move into a couple of SNK games. A huge shout out to Justin Wong for showing one specific game that I think is also an incredible IP that has been forgotten, and that is The Last Blade. I think that The Last Blade was one of the most fun arcade fighting games from SNK, and I'm pretty surprised that we have not seen it come back at all, taking into account also that SNK is clearly trying to get back at the top. I think that if SNK develop a new Last Blade and made it, you know, in a modern take, basically like Sam Show 2019, it could be a really successful fighting game. People love samurais, people love this sort of like Japanese culture around swordsman and stuff like that, and martial arts. So I really do think that if SNK executed it correctly, a new The Last Blade with a full reboot and everything could be a huge hit, even bigger than what they wanted Fatal Fury to be. So I think that they just need to get the work done. You know, think about this IP that is kind of like getting lost in time and people are forgetting about, basically, to get back at the top and make a comeback. I think that The Last Blade has everything for it: the roster, the gameplay mechanics. Basically, it's one of the most interesting arcade fighting games from the 90s made by SNK when it comes to gameplay, and the roster is also so good. So I really would like to see a new The Last Blade, maybe, if we're lucky enough, it could happen. And the second game that we're gonna talk for SNK has to be Art of Fighting, and this is probably the most likely from all the lists to actually happen, because SNK has said openly that they're working on a reboot for Art of Fighting as an IP, and I think that this specific IP also is very strong if executed correctly. The problem with Fatal Fury, for example, was not really the IP itself, and that is not like famous enough. It was all the problems around marketing and everything that we have discussed a ton of times on this channel. And with Art of Fighting, I think that if you fix all of the mistakes that you committed around the reboot for Fatal Fury, it could be a huge game. Like, Art of Fighting has the mechanics, has the characters. A couple of characters from Art of Fighting are even more famous than Fatal Fury characters, so in that sense, I think that it has the potential, but you need to execute it really well. I hope that SNK is of course actively working on the reboot for Art of Fighting, because it's probably gonna happen sooner than we even think. And I hope that is being done right, because SNK games, you know, still are suffering, and I would love to see SNK back at the top. And with Art of Fighting, I hope that maybe they are closer to what they want to be as a fighting game developer, basically. So let's hope that we can see a new entry in the Art of Fighting series sooner than later. And now we're gonna move into a little more obscure territory, because we're gonna talk about a couple of fighting game IPs that were made by Konami. Yes guys, Konami used to develop fighting games. It sounds insane, right? But Konami in the last few years has been basically making a comeback in the general gaming industry with, you know, Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel, eFootball, the Metal Gear collections, the new Metal Gear that is coming up, the Silent Hill remakes. Like, they're back, baby. So maybe we could see Bloody Roar come back. I think that Bloody Roar could also be a really successful modern fighting game if executed right. It is one of the most interesting 3D fighters of all time. The transformation mechanic, it is still fresh and amazing to see, and I think that Bloody Roar has, you know, the space in the market to be big, especially taking into account that 3D fighters at the moment only basically have Tekken as an environment. Like, Tekken 8 is the only big 3D fighting game out there, and Virtua Fighter is coming in the horizon, but it's still only 2 games. So I think that Bloody Roar, if you make a new one and you execute it right and the game looks incredible and is faithful to what made it unique, it could be one of the biggest comebacks for a fighting game IP ever. So maybe we can hope for a new Bloody Roar in the future. And the second game from Konami has to be Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Tournament Fighters. This is basically the only like traditional fighting game we have ever gotten for the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and it's kind of like a clone of Street Fighter 2 in many ways, like a mix of SF2 and SF2 Turbo. And this is a game that still has a community going strong for it. There's still a couple of tournaments for it, and it was very unique at its time, and it is still in many ways a game that people would love to see in the modern era of fighting games. I believe like people still love, you know, TMNT, the characters and everything that you can do around them in a fighting game. So I think that if you execute it correctly, like what it happens with Art of Fighting for example, it could also be a huge comeback for a classic 2D fighter. You would not even need to make it that specifically different from other games, because it has the TMNT characters on it, and that is kind of like enough to sell a game, I would argue. So if we ever get a reboot for this, it will be really epic, and I would love to see it personally. It would be very fun to play also, but I don't know if it's gonna happen. This is probably one of the less likely games in the entire list. Like, it is very not likely, but still I wanted to talk about it, and if we got a new TMNT traditional fighting game, it will be huge. And now it is time to move into games made by Bandai Namco, and the first one has to be Soul Calibur. To me, it is actually kind of sad to put Soul Calibur in this list, because the last game is not that old, but it feels in many ways like the possibility of Soul Calibur making a comeback after Soul Calibur 6 is almost zero. Like, it feels like this IP is done for. And I would be very sad if an iconic and legendary, you know, intellectual property around the fighting game genre like Soul Calibur would never come back. It would be so sad. It has everything also to be successful, it just needs to be well executed, like I've said with many other games. Like, the problem with many fighting games when you make a comeback for them or when you make a new entry in their series is that the games are so bad as an overall product. And that happened with Soul Calibur 6. It was not, you know, the best new fighting game out there at all. It didn't have, you know, like a huge graphical fidelity jump. It also didn't offer that much to the player outside of, you know, hardcore fighting game experience. So even if it had, you know, a couple of guest DLC characters that were famous enough, it was not, you know, the breaking point for Soul Calibur 6 to be big and basically make the IP famous like it was before. So yeah, I just hope that Soul Calibur can come back, that Bandai is not gonna forget about it for 30 years, and that we can maybe get Soul Calibur 7 or a reboot for this series done right. And I hope that that is enough to put this game back at the top and be as big as it was in the past, because Soul Calibur was one of the biggest fighting games, you know, in the 90s. And I think that it can still be that, it can still be at that elite popularity level if you executed it right, like what it happens with many other fighting game IPs. So let's just hope that Soul Calibur makes a comeback. And now we get into what is probably the most obscure game in this list, because it is not even a traditional fighting game, it is technically an arena fighter, and that is Saint Seiya the Hades. And this is a game that I would love to see in some way make a comeback. It doesn't need to be the exactly same game, like it doesn't need to be an arena fighter actually. I just would love to see a game like this, but maybe in a more traditional fighting game setting, because I love these characters, I love this anime. It's one of the animes that I saw when I was a little kid, and I would love to see a game come back with, you know, high fidelity graphics for this IP. And if it happens on the arena fighter setup, I would not be mad at all about it, but it will probably not be the best when it comes to, you know, gameplay. So in that sense, if we can ever get like a Saint Seiya traditional fighting game that is kind of like maybe inspiring what this game was in some ways, I think that it will be amazing. I will be super happy with it, and probably you don't even know this game, so I'm not gonna talk about it that much, but just take into account that I would love to see a Saint Seiya fighting game make a comeback around the IP, like what had happened with, for example, Dragon Ball FighterZ, or something similar to that sort of take. And we finally get into the last fighting game developer, which is ArcSys and Works, and we have a couple of games for them too. Of course, the first one has to be some sort of comeback for the fighting game in general around Persona as an IP. I think that Persona 4 Arena Ultimax was a pretty cool fighting game, and many people would be super happy if we got any sort of new FG around the Persona IP. It doesn't need to be like a direct sequel to this or anything, but the amount of people, dude, that would be happy and going crazy for a new Persona fighting game is actually maybe bigger than what you think. So I believe that a new Persona FG would be not only a huge success, but also another, you know, on the list of basically huge hits for ArcSys in the last year. So maybe we could get a new Persona fighting game. I don't know exactly around what game it will have to be based, maybe around Persona 5 probably, but it could be a huge hit. And now we have to talk about the elephant in the room, because it's BlazBlue, man. I think that so many people and for so much time have been asking for a new BlazBlue game. It's kind of insane, and ArcSys still has, from what I understand, the rights for BlazBlue. It's just that the person that used to work around this IP for making the fighting games is not in the company anymore, but ArcSys still owns the characters and all of that. So I think that it is possible to get a new BlazBlue, you know, I don't know when, because, you know, ArcSys is working on Marvel Talcon and probably on Season 5 of Strive. So I'm not like confident enough to say that we could get an announcement for a new BlazBlue soon. I think that it is much further away than what we think, which is kind of sad, to be honest, because people have been asking for a new BlazBlue for so long. But we have to talk about, you know, this IP in this video. There are so many people out there that want a new BlazBlue, and I think that at this point it doesn't even matter if it is a tag fighting game or a 1v1. It would probably end up being a 1v1, taking into account that they are now working on a tag fighting game because of Talcon. But yeah, I think that too many people would be happy with a new BlazBlue that is single 1v1 and is more traditional anime fighter, so it needs to happen. And that was the video, guys. I hope that you enjoyed the video. Let me know in the comments which of these IPs you love the most, or maybe you want one that I didn't mention, so put it in the comments. Like and subscribe if you can, if you enjoyed the video, and get ready for EVO in this weekend. See you on the next one.